extremely creepy neighbors. So a little background information, I was 12 years old and I was in 6th grade, and my family and I lived in a really small town where everyone knew everyone. But our new neighbors had been building their house next to us for the past 4 years. And finally, when they were done with the house, this house was huge. I mean, probably because there were like 8 people moving into the house. There was the mom, the dad, 4 kids, and their grandparents. So like 8 people. But I was super excited because I was like, okay, this is awesome. I get to meet some new friends. But after 2 weeks of not seeing anybody playing in the backyard or anybody on the school bus, I started to think that their family was super fucking weird. And everyone in our neighborhood liked to gossip, and everyone was saying how they barely see the people who had just moved in. So my mom decided to take one for the team and make some brownies, take them over to the house, and I ended up going with her. So we go up to the house, we knock on the door, and one of the kids came and opened the door, but the dad ran over and grabbed him. Like for part 2. Part 2 about my extremely creepy neighbors. So like I said, my mom and I took some brownies over there, and one of the kids opened the door, and when he opened the door, he had a bunch of bruises all over his body. The dad came running over and ripped his son from the door and slammed the door in our faces, and all you could hear was him screaming at his son. So my mom and I went to walk away before the door opened, and he was like, sorry, my son knows better than to open the door to strangers. So he took the brownies, and then I asked him if I could have a sleepover with one of his daughters, and he was super hesitant at first, but he said that I could only have a sleepover with her if it was at my house and not theirs, which my mom was completely fine with anyways, because she thought that it was a little bit weird that his son had bruises covering his whole body. So that night when she came over to sleep over my house, I asked her how her brother got all those bruises all over his body, and she said that he just fell down some stairs. But after that, we became best friends, and we would literally hang out like 5 times a week, until the one day I knocked on their door to ask if she wanted to come over, and her dad answered the door and said that she was gone. Like for part 3. Part 3 about my super creepy neighbors. So like I said, I became best friends with their daughter, but the one day I went over her house to ask if she wanted to come over, and her dad answered the door and said that she was gone. And when I asked when she would be back, he was like, she went to go live with her mom, so probably never. Which was super weird because she never mentioned that she had another mom. So fast forward 2 months, my family and I are sitting around the fire pit when we hear someone scream help. But we weren't sure if that's what we were actually hearing because it was so quiet, and then all of a sudden we heard someone banging on my neighbor's basement door. You know those metal doors that people usually have outside of their house that lead down basement steps? Yeah, well that's where the banging was coming from. So my dad hopped over the fence to see if that's where the screaming was coming from also. And then not even a minute later, my dad hopped back over the fence and it looked like he saw a ghost, but he ran inside, called 911. Because I was so young, the only thing my parents told me about that whole situation was that the girl that I was friends with was still alive and her parents were keeping her in the basement along with 2 of her other siblings. But then we also found out that they weren't even her real parents. They were kidnapped at the hospital when they were born.
Story time about how a stranger wandered into my house and it led to something amazing. I woke up one night to someone ringing my doorbell over and over vigorously. I looked at the clock and I saw it was 3 in the morning. I went to the door and looked out of the peephole and saw a young woman outside on my porch. I opened the door and could immediately tell that she was intoxicated. She started explaining to me that she was at a bar down the street and lost her phone. That's when she asked if she could use mine and call someone for a ride home. It was freezing outside, so I reluctantly let her in. She asked me for water, so I led her to the kitchen. She proceeded to open my fridge and start eating my lunch meat and various other snacks. She then kicked off her heels and sat down at the table with a jar of pickles and started talking to me like she's known me for years. She told me her name was Krista and asked me how work was and what I was up to tomorrow. I reminded her that she needs to call someone to come pick her up and handed her my cell phone. She took the phone and FaceTimed her brother. She told him that she needs a ride but she has no idea where she's at and handed me the phone to talk to him. I told him the situation and gave him my address to come pick her up ASAP. A few seconds later, my doorbell began ringing again and someone started banging on my door. I went to the door and opened it to find a guy outside and he looked furious. This is when things got intense. Part 2 of how a stranger wandered into my house and it led to something amazing. I opened the door and quickly found out that this guy was Chris's boyfriend, and it became clear that they were in some sort of fight. Chris started telling him to leave and accused him of following her and kept screaming at him that it's over between them. The guy turned his attention to me and asked what guy Krista was here to sleep with and began accusing her of coming here to cheat. He started yelling at me for helping her. All of a sudden, he grabbed Krista by her hair and started dragging her out of the house. I quickly ran after them and started screaming at the top of my lungs for him to let her go. Luckily, one of my neighbors heard the commotion and came to our aid. The guy let Krista go, but now he was trying to fist fight my neighbor. A few seconds later, a truck pulled up to my house and a man jumped out, which turned out to be Krista's brother. I quickly explained the situation and helped Krista into his truck. Krista's brother proceeded to confront her boyfriend, who was still making a scene, knocked him out clean with one hit, and drove off, leaving her boyfriend knocked out cold on my front lawn. Her brother texted me the next day thanking me and apologizing for knocking that guy out in my yard. We started texting back and forth and getting along, and I actually asked him out a couple days later. We've been dating for a few months now thanks to his drunk sister stumbling onto my porch. I guess everything happens for a reason.
Story time about how I ruined my ex-best friend's relationship and reputation in 2 days. So a little background information, I was 14 in 8th grade. I was in a very toxic friend group of 3, and we all secretly talk crap about each other. So 2 of the girls in my friend group decided that they didn't want to be friends with me anymore, for absolutely no reason. The one girl texted me saying, I don't want to be friends with you anymore, and then the other girl literally just played along with it because she can't think for herself. She was like, yeah, I've been planning on doing this for like 2 weeks. So I got very embarrassed by this because they started going around the school telling everybody about it. And not to sound like that person, but I was really popular. I had a lot more friends than them, and the only reason why people liked them was because they were my friends. Anyway, so I started texting the boys that they liked. And I was like, hey, I think you should know that they've been talking to other people while they're talking to you. And I just thought that that was really wrong. And when they asked who, I gave them names of boys that they both used to talk to. And then when the girls texted me about it, like for part 2 about how I ruined my ex-best friend's relationship and reputation in 2 days. So like I said, I texted the boys that they liked saying that they were talking to other people. And then of course my ex-best friends got mad and then they started texting me about it saying, oh, why are you lying, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, honestly, I just think it's really wrong for you to try and play these boys who actually have feelings for you. Yes, I know I was a little crazy, but who isn't? Anyway, so then I decided to get my mom involved because I had been friends with these girls for a while. So my mom knew their parents very well. So I told my mom I was really worried about them because they were starting to get into really bad stuff and hanging out with the wrong crowd. So I couldn't be friends with them. And they tried to talk me into doing stuff. So then my mom called their parents. Well, then their mom started to drop them off and pick them up every day because they were grounded. Well, then their mom started to apologize to my mom because their kids were such bad influences on me. And then when everybody asked why we stopped being friends, I told them that they made fun of my grandma who isn't alive. And 4 years later, everybody still hates them. Story time, my best friend cheated on his girlfriend with me. So a little background information. So Gavin and I had been best friends ever since we were little. We lived in the same neighborhood, and my parents and his grandparents were like pretty close, I guess. But like everybody in our neighborhood was close with each other. And I always had a huge crush on him. And I would try to like subtly tell him that I liked him. But he would always be like, ew, don't joke with me like that. Like, that's not true. And eventually, I just kind of got the hint that that was his way of telling me, I don't like you. Stop before I tell you in a mean way. So when we were in middle school, he was always having these like 2-day relationships with all these girls and everything. And me, not so much because sis didn't have a glow up until she reached like her sophomore year in high school. And the thing was, I wasn't that best friend who would be like, ew, don't date her, like she's ugly or anything like that. Like I would totally respect all of his relationships, even if they were 2 days long, but he would literally still block me. Well, the one day we were hanging out at his house, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my best friend cheated on his girlfriend with me. So like I said, the one night I was at his house and he was on my phone and he was asking me who all these guys were on my Snapchat. And I told him that I had been talking to them and he was just being super toxic. He was talking shit on every single one of them. So eventually I started dating this guy Trey, and after that he texted me saying that I was gross and everything else, when the next day he literally got a girlfriend. But weirdly enough, he didn't block me that time. He actually started texting me more, saying how him and his girlfriend were so happy together, da-da-da-da-da. And unlike him, I would be supportive. Well, the one night at 2 a.m. he came over my house and he was like, I don't have feelings for my girlfriend. And I'm like, okay, then why are you with her? And then he has the nerve to say, don't you get that I like you? Like, really? Well, eventually we cut off all communication and he was still with this girl. Well, the one night he asked me to come over and talk, and we ended up doing the nasty. And then he blocked me on everything after he said we should both leave our girlfriends and boyfriends. Well, I ended up telling his girlfriend what we did, and they also come to my family cookouts.